Welcome to the Secret Agenda channel. The Ukraine war waged by Vladimir Putin has given his country great difficulties in the international arena. All of Europe and the United States imposed heavy sanctions on Russia. As a result of both economic and military sanctions, Russia is dragged into a Great Depression. But Russian President Vladimir Putin knew this would happen as he entered the war. The first thing he did not plan was that the armed forces of Ukraine could resist for so long. First disappointed as the Russian army retreated from Kiev, Vladimir Putin downsized his goals. However, the superiority of the Ukrainian armed forces over the Russian army has started to show itself in every region. Vladimir Putin's loss of Kherson and the heavy losses of Russian soldiers and supporters in the east caused harsh reactions against him from within Russia. While this is rare, Putin has lost many of his staff over the course of the war. Even though the Kremlin still maintains its silence against Putin, it is stated that the opposition side is in a serious structuring. At the same time, harsh criticism of Putin began to come from Russian officials in Ukraine. The large number of Russian casualties in key conflicts in eastern Ukraine sparked an unusual public reaction and harsh criticism of military commanders by surviving soldiers and family members of recently recruited fighters, who said their units were driven to slaughter in ill-planned operations. The turmoil over casualties on the battlefield near Vuhledar in the Donetsk region led to an official statement from the Russian Ministry of Defense, which sought to downplay the reported high death toll among soldiers of the 155th Separate Guards Marine Brigade, which led Moscow's offensive in the region. For the first time since the start of the invasion of Russia, the ministry has officially responded to the mass casualties and criticism of the commanders on Telegram, the main platform used by officials as well as reporters and bloggers covering the Russian war. It is illegal in Russia to criticize war or even call it war rather than a special military operation. In recent months, however, the Kremlin has tolerated criticism of the military's poor performance by pro-war hawks who support the invasion. Some of them demand even more brutal tactics in Ukraine. Pro-Kremlin military correspondents said the 155th Pavlivka unit, normally based in Russia's Far East, is in the Donetsk region of Ukraine. As a result of the carefully planned attack by the great generals, we have about 300 dead, injured and missing people, and lost half the equipment in 4 days, the report said. It was addressed to Governor Oleg Kozamyako from the Primorsky region on the coast of the Sea of Japan. Alexander Khodakovsky, commander of the pro-Russian Vostok Battalion, wrote that the weather has deteriorated in Pavlivka in eastern Ukraine, some 6,000 miles away, with rain clouding the roads and making it difficult to reinforce troops in the area. My fears about Pavlivka were justified, Khodakovsky said, adding that he felt that the advance the Russian commanders had initiated in the region was premature. Rustam Muradov, the commander of Russia's Eastern Military District, who was appointed in October, was also particularly criticized in the report. Early in the war, Muradov led the Vostok Force Group, which was responsible for operations in the eastern regions of Donetsk and Luhansk. Officially, the military did not specify a region for the reassignment, but this came after the Russian army suffered a defeat at Lyman, an important logistics and supply center in the Donetsk region. The embarrassing defeat came a day after Russian President Vladimir Putin declared the annexation of Donetsk and 3 other Ukrainian regions a violation of international law. Vladimir Putin, who always blamed the destruction of the Russian army on the Russian commanders, continued to dismiss the Russian generals. Thinking that this would turn into an advantage, Putin had to watch the collapse of the command system in his army. Many soldiers in the Russian army now oppose the Russian commanders and fight among themselves. The liquidation of experienced generals is seen as the main reason for this destruction in the army. The Russian chain of command appeared in constant turmoil throughout the war, as Moscow repeatedly changed general commanders and replaced senior generals in all 4 of its military districts. The Russian media has lately highlighted strategic missteps and the poor performance of troops by Chechen leader Ramazan Kadyrov and Putin's ally and financier of the Wagner mercenary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin. Governor Kozamyako at first described the letter as a fake potentially planted by Ukrainians, but later said he had contacted the officers on the front line by posting a video message and confirmed that there had been heavy fighting and casualties. But the number is not as high as he wrote in the letter, he said. The Russian Ministry of Defense said that Due to the competent actions of the commanders on the issue, losses among sailors during this period did not exceed 1% of combat personnel and 7% of the wounded, a significant part of which returned to duty. The ministry added that the 155th Brigade had been fighting near the regional center Vuhledar for more than 10 days and was advancing 5 kilometers deep from Ukrainian positions. However, there are also rumors that the 155th Brigade is facing a great loss or even disappeared. Many pro-war commentators in Russia are urging the ministry to be more transparent about its defeats. Rather than appease these critics, however, the statement only fueled their anger by minimizing the extent of casualties. Moscow's top officials are now trying to fend off another public scandal after residents of the town of Voronezh, located in Russia's strategic region close to the Ukrainian border, complained about the unprepared deportation of conscripts from the region to Svatove, Luhansk. Hundreds may have died, according to the Russian newspaper Verstka. They were under bombardment for 3 days. They tried to survive as best as they could. They had no food and no sleep. In a video address recorded by the soldiers' family members and published by Verstka, one soldier's wife, Inna Popova, held out for 3 days and, unlike their commander, did not escape. "Please help us rescue our mobilized men and get them out of the first line of defense," said Popova, adding that her husband was mobilized on October 12th and was sent to Ukraine shortly thereafter. Russian officials have repeatedly argued that the new recruits, called in amidst an unpopular mobilization effort that Putin launched to replenish his army after several failures, will be tasked primarily with controlling already occupied areas and supporting the rear and will not serve as the main advancing force. However, the use of Russian recruits on the front lines who came to the war was reflected in reports that most of them died. Moscow took control of the Luhansk region early in the war, but its dominance in the region is threatened after Russian troops suffered a defeat near Kharkiv in September and lost linemen in the area for which Colonel General Lapin was responsible. If Russia loses Svatova, Ukrainian forces could possibly advance towards Luhansk, retaking most of the territory Putin claims to have annexed and incorporated into Russia. So what happened in Kherson can now happen in Luhansk. Referring to family members, Verstka reported that the soldiers mobilized in Voronezh were on the front line after only a few days of training, presumably by a decision of their commander aimed at closing gaps in the defensive lines and returning exhausted troops. 2 soldiers from the Voronezh region told Verstka that only a few dozen of the more than 500 soldiers in their unit had been taken since last week's heavy shelling. Voronezh Regional Governor Alexander Gusev said on Sunday that he had met with family members who recorded the video address. Gusev's press service did not deny reports of the mass disappearances, and the local news outlet deleted a report saying the information was fake. According to a screenshot posted by a journalist at the pool, the press service told local pool journalists, "The situation is quite difficult to find impartiality, so we do not take responsibility for making such statements and discussing any numbers or facts." Russian President Vladimir Putin said at a government meeting recently that Russia has officially sent 50,000 reinforcements to Ukraine in recent weeks, and that at least 250,000 more are in training. Russian and Ukrainian forces are preparing for a harsh winter that will complicate nearly every aspect of the war, from logistics to morale to the physical health of the troops. After weeks of Russian attacks on the country's energy infrastructure, it will be increasingly difficult for Ukraine to tolerate the approaching cold weather. However, the Russian army will be much more affected by the effects of winter than the Ukrainian armed forces. Last winter had not been good for the Russian army. In the last months of winter, even geographical conditions made them very difficult. For this reason, spending the whole winter on the territory of Ukraine may be a harbinger of great destruction for them. Even if they try to weaken Ukraine, this does not seem like a realistic goal. Their damage to civilian infrastructure is fueling Russian grudges in Ukraine, but it does not hinder the progress of the Ukrainian armed forces.